Hawati en tawi, tem jefa kau, ta pen em awef, mu f, ta f, sem f, minute f nebet.
When Armstrong said that's one small step for man and one giant leap for mankind, I think that the footprint that he was leaving was in Area 51, north of Las Vegas, Nevada.
During the 1960s, Bill Kaysing was head of technical publications for Rocketdyne, a company involved in the manufacture of the Apollo rockets. This gave him access to top-secret documents. What he read led him to question the feasibility of the whole moon project. He claims the CIA had made 3 attempts on his life to silence his controversial views. Today, he keeps a low profile, living on a cat sanctuary in the Nevada desert.
I really believe that they weren't in the command capsule at launch. They did a little bit of a magician act with the astronauts. They went up the elevator, but they came down the elevator. In other words, they did not want to risk the lives of the astronauts in case the Saturn blew up.
There is absolutely no way they went to the moon with what they had. In fact, there's no way they can go today. There's no way they can go tomorrow. You don't send man where you haven't sent the monkey.
Nevertheless, the president had promised a man on the moon by 1970. If NASA couldn't do it, they'd have to fake it, with foolproof documentary evidence. Marcus Allen is the British publisher of Nexus, a magazine dedicated to alternative politics, history, and science.
Those photographs can be demonstrated not to have been taken on the lunar surface. Now, if they were not taken on the lunar surface, there's only one other place they could have been taken, and that's on Earth.
Documentary evidence from all 6 of the successful Apollo landings shows similar anomalies. In some, areas lit from behind, which should be in deep shadow, are bright and perfectly visible. In other pictures, the shadows are at near right angles, suggesting 2 separate light sources. Perhaps most surprisingly, there are no stars in the Apollo photographs, even though they were taken from space. When the archive film is sped up, the astronauts appear to be running at normal speed in terrestrial gravity. And why does the flag appear to be fluttering in a breeze, even though there's no wind on the moon?
Ever since the dawn of human history, we dreamed about going to other worlds, and this was the first time it had been done. And of course it was an exciting time, and also a very tense one. And of course I knew both Neil and Buzz. And of course there was no provision for rescue. Had they made a faulty landing, they couldn't have got back, and that would have been too ghastly to contemplate.
But the skeptics claim NASA faced an uphill struggle. They could not guarantee success with the apparently primitive technology of the 1960s. This was brought into sharp focus just 14 months before the mission, when Neil Armstrong test-piloted a prototype landing module.
Unfortunately, it went out of his control, and luckily he was able to eject before it crashed in flames. And of course, the point is, if they couldn't get a simulator to work on Earth, how in the world could they get the actual lunar module to work on the moon? I do not think it was feasible for the astronauts to take the wonderful pictures that NASA has presented as having been taken on the moon. There are so many impediments that were natural. The fact that they wore gloves that couldn't be manipulated, the fact that they didn't have any sources of light, any flash.
Ralph Renee also believes the design of the Apollo suits would have prevented the astronauts operating anything as delicate as a camera. To prove the point, he's designed a space glove machine, which is supposed to replicate the effects of space on the body.
In the near vacuum of space, the gases within his body would immediately expand.
And what I do is I pull a vacuum in this chamber I created, and I have a glove inserted inside of it. And it was to prove that the flexibility they shown in their suits and gloves are impossible. Right now, I can put my hand in there and I can move it every which way. I can grasp, I make a fist, I can lift up, down. But as soon as I throw this switch here, I evacuate the chamber.
As the air is sucked out of the machine, the vacuum makes the glove increasingly difficult to flex.
And this glove doesn't want to move. I can't bend it backwards. I can hardly force it down, and I can make a fist, but you can't hold it. And you could never pick, I mean, how could you pick up small screws and bolts like they've shown them to do, or trigger a little tiny trigger on a camera with the glove doing this?
The lunar cameras didn't need a viewfinder. The restrictions of the helmet made it impossible for the astronauts to look down and frame a shot.
Basically, you could just sort of point that camera at what you wanted without having to really look through a viewfinder.
This is where the shutter is on the Hasselblad camera, which cannot be seen from inside the helmet the astronauts are wearing. So how do they know they've taken a photograph? How do they know the fingers even got onto the shutter? How do they know they've pressed it?
The shutter release, normally a very small button, has been made especially large so that it can be pressed with an astronaut's glove.
Reinforced inner suits also helped the astronauts manipulate the camera, as did several other design features. But even if you accept that photographs could physically have been taken on the moon, you're still left with the most famous of the apparent photographic anomalies, the shadows.
The shadows are one of the strong proofs that we never went to the moon. If you examine pictures offered by NASA as genuine, you find that in many cases the shadows are not parallel. Well, since the sun was the only source of light, all shadows on the moon should be exactly parallel, but they aren't.
The lunar shadows sometimes fall in different directions. The skeptics claim this as incontrovertible evidence of at least two light sources.
There's only one sun. There are not two. But these shadows are anomalous in that sometimes they are diverging from objects and sometimes converging. And it can't be. You can go any place on this planet when the sun's up and you look at two objects and those sun shadows are parallel.
The skeptics have also called into question areas that should be in shade, claiming a second light has been used to highlight areas that should have been a dense black.
Well, let's have a look at one of the most famous photographs of the 20th century, Man on the Moon. It was taken by Neil Armstrong of Buzz Aldrin on Apollo 11. Given that it's very harsh light, as you can see here, where it strikes directly, you would expect the shadow area to be virtually invisible, but it's not.
The symbolic highlight of Apollo, the planting of the American flag, has also generated deep suspicion.
Wherever there's an American flag, it's always brilliantly lit up, even if it's on the shadow side. And on the shadow side, that should be really dark black. But they had little spotlights, obviously, because that's the only way you can do it.
Oh, geez, that's great. Is the lighting halfway decent?
But this does not explain how a flag can wave in a windless environment.
When they were filming some of the flag scenes, they had air conditioners going to keep the astronauts cooler since they were wearing their little space suits. So it's very possible that what we saw was wind.
Could the waving flag be a gaffe too far? Conclusive proof that the landings were faked in a studio?
What I see is a flutter which is caused by variable wind pressures. So the picture could not have been taken on the moon, no matter what the apologists say. Either that or the moon has a breeze.
But decreased gravity and the lack of atmosphere can't provide an explanation for the next apparent blunder. When the 16-ton Eagle touched down, it should, claim the skeptics, have disturbed the surface of the moon, blowing the top layer of dust away to expose the rock beneath. But the images show footprints clearly imprinted around the base of the spacecraft. Surely the dust would have blown away, or worse.
This enormously powerful jet of flame and heat and gas, it would have easily scooped up an enormous crater. In fact, there was supposition that the crater would have been so big that the lunar lander would have disappeared into it. That's true.
They didn't move dry dust, they didn't move little rocks, they didn't move anything. So the demonstration is to show that this stuff will disappear immediately, and I'll even be able to gouge some kind of a hole. Come here, you. I haven't used you in a long time. Here we go.
According to Ralph René's experiment, the moon, like the gravel pit, wouldn't have stood a chance.
When it actually landed, the dust was all still there. Now, how can that be? You know, if you blow dust away, it goes away, like I just did here. I swept the ground.
But the most intriguing anomaly has to be the absence of the largest, most stunning objects seen in space. In a sky untouched by streetlights, atmosphere, or pollution, the view of the night sky should be spectacular. But incredibly, stars appear to be missing from the Apollo photographs.
Back then, fortunately for me and us who are trying to break this thing out, the truth, they took no pictures of the stars.
Bill Kaysing believes that omitting the stars was all part of NASA's deception.
Astronomers could have easily discerned that the star positions were not those that would have appeared in a photograph taken from the moon. So it's another case where they could not fake it, so they simply ignored it. If you were to talk to Aldrin or Armstrong or any of the other Apollo astronauts, they would actually not respond in any way to questions regarding stars.
A mysterious rock in a notorious Apollo 16 photograph has only added fuel to the fire.
It's a rock that obviously was made out of paper mache, and very clearly on the rock is the letter C.
Ralph René believes the C rock was probably the C prop.
Somebody told me that in Hollywood, when they do a set, the set manager comes around and drops cards on the ground, and it says A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, or 1 to 10 or whatever, and the prop men, whatever you call these people, they come out and they put that particular prop over the card. But in Hollywood, they're smart enough to turn the thing upside down so you can't see the mark on the prop.
NASA simply claims that this photo was a freak accident, that the C is in fact a hair on the negative.
And I think it's gonna be a long, long time till touchdown brings me round again to...
But this nitpicking over photographs is irrelevant for magazine publisher Marcus Allen. He's convinced that no photographic film could possibly have survived the journey to the moon and back in the first place.
In an unprotected camera, in unprotected environment, and the films that were in photographs we have seen as a result of that, it demonstrate absolutely no radiation damage whatsoever.
In 1998, IMAX began production on a film about the construction of the International Space Station.
They flew the cameras up in the space shuttle with their magazines attached, and the IMAX cameras take 70mm roll film. Incidentally, the same film as was used in the Hasselblad still cameras on Apollo. This film had to be protected, and it was carried up in lead-lined boxes.
Radiation may be the final insurmountable obstacle. Not only would it apparently destroy film, it would also kill the astronauts. The Earth's magnetic field shields our planet from high doses of radiation.
The moon is irradiated by the sun constantly with terrible heat, and of course there's cosmic radiation, and then there are micrometeorites that travel 60,000 miles an hour that would go right through the camera, the film, and of course the astronauts themselves.
While the odds against a micrometeoroid hitting an astronaut are believed to be extremely low, any puncture would be decidedly uncomfortable.
'Cause
Not only that, on leaving the Earth's atmosphere, the astronauts had to negotiate the Van Allen belts.
Van Allen, he said it was a sea of deadly radiation. You would pick up a death dose just about the time you got through the Van Allen shield. You'd be cooked and you'd be dying.
These radioactive belts form a thick invisible ring around the Earth's equator, thinning out around the North and South poles.
Until they get an engine that'll lift the life capsule surrounded by 6 feet of water or equivalent mass of lead, they don't even dare go through the Van Allen shield.
NASA claims the astronauts endured only a very brief exposure, passing through the thinnest parts of the belts in a matter of hours. But once they were through, they faced a still more deadly phenomenon.
So here we have these clowns running around in tinfoil craft, stopping solar radiation. And I'm not talking about the light, I'm talking about the radiation from the solar storms.
You put a man in a powerful solar flare, he's dead. End of story, he is dead, unless he carries protection.
These unpredictable eruptions from the sun can knock out satellites and electricity grids on Earth, but they can be detected by an early warning computer system.
When you land on the moon, you're practically standing still, being bombarded with all this solar radiation and smacking into you, which is why they had to hide the whole thing, because it just can't be done. It couldn't be done then, can't be done today, and it sure isn't going to be done in the future when they're planning on this manned mission to Mars.
Just 3 months after the Apollo 16 mission, NASA admitted that a violent solar flare did hit the moon's surface. It was powerful enough to have killed the astronauts.
The lunar rocks were fake, just like the pictures were in the stories of the astronauts. NASA has a ceramics laboratory where it would have been very easy to produce the 800 pounds of rocks allegedly brought back from the moon.
The volume of evidence is that the space program that appears on the television news and has done these last few decades is actually only there as a movie to hide the real program, which is actually exploring things that these guys already know are there. There's this secret agenda in which advanced knowledge that people in general never hear is passed on to the chosen ones that are chosen to have this information and to move it through the generations. The agenda for centralized control and all that stuff. And then there's the movie, which is there to hide all that. And the movie is the official version of events that pours out of the television. They're being sold a cover story to hide what's really going on, not just in terms of the space program, but in every area of our lives. I mean, what is the more classic and obvious cover story than weapons of mass destruction, we've got to go and get them? And clearly, you know, we see it was a cover story now. If you had a brain, you could see it was before. I've said in my latest book, Tales from the Time Loop, that we're looking at the Fourth Reich. And then I put under that brackets, or a continuation of the Third, which never ended. People have no idea, in the general population, because no one tells them, of the fundamental connections between the Nazis. The people now think, oh yeah, the Nazis have gone, and the American administration. First of all, the Nazis were funded out of Britain and America. Why is it that they were taking their wages home in wheelbarrows during the Weimar Republic? Germany was in economic catastrophe. A few short years later, they have a war machine that's taking on the world. How did this come about? Anyone else? Well, let's ask the Bush family. Because, and this is not just me, other researchers have come up with this, and a guy called John Loftus, who is he runs the Holocaust Museum in Florida, that Prescott Bush, who is the grandfather of the present president, He was a major executive of the Harriman Empire in America. And they had a company called the Union Banking Corporation, the UBC, which interfaced with the banking and steel empire in Europe of a guy called Fritz Thyssen, who was named at places like the Nuremberg trial and elsewhere as a major funder of Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. And what Prescott Bush, who was the key executive in the Union Banking Corporation, was doing was funneling money and other resources through the UBC into Thyssen's empire, and then it went to the Nazis, and that's where the war machine came from, also through the Bank of England.
Only yesterday, every business, every profession was part of Hitler's system. The doctors, technicians, clockmakers, postmen. Practically every German was part of the Nazi network. They believe they were born to be masters, that we are inferiors, designed to be their slaves.
A number of companies in which Prescott Bush was involved in were closed down during the Second World War under the Trading with the Enemies Act. William S. Farish, whose grandson is now Bush's ambassador to Britain, William S. Farish III, very close friend and horse interbreeder with the Queen of England. His grandfather, William S. Farish, was president of Standard Oil, the Rockefeller Oil Company, when it was exposed as supplying the Nazis with oil during the Second World War, while they were supposedly in conflict with America. So what you had then was this CIA, British intelligence operation called Project Paperclip, which was to get the Nazis, the major Nazis, with all and a lot that with tremendous knowledge that are not registered by history, out of Germany so they would be safe, and into South America and North America to continue this agenda up to the present day. And so this is why you have Nazi after Nazi turning up as founders of and creators of NASA and all these other institutions, the CIA, that appeared immediately after the Second World War.
In 2003, the skeptical magazine Fortean Times claimed that no such craft or Nazi secret space program had ever existed. But we have been given patents from leading German manufacturing companies, including Juha, Krups and BMW, which prove beyond all reasonable doubt that Hitler considered the Nazi secret space program a top priority. And more than 15 billion Deutschmarks were spent developing craft of all shapes and sizes.
Gentlemen, the conquest of outer space is the greatest technological challenge of the age in which we live. The first decisive step in the conquest of space will be the placing of an object into an orbit wherein it will indefinitely circle the Earth.
1954. Sputnik 1 shocks the world and puts the USSR way ahead in the Cold War. Sputnik 2 takes a dog into space, the first living creature to leave the face of planet Earth. Russia then shocks the world by sending an unmanned probe to the moon. Meanwhile, the US Army plan Project Horizon, a plan to colonize the moon with Americans. This plan was soon abandoned when the true nature of the hostile environment of outer space was discovered by American and Russian scientists. (1958). Spectacular rocket failures destroy American morale. The Explorer 1 space probe confirms planet Earth is surrounded by dangerous radiation. Radiation so powerful that it could cause nausea and cancer. The Van Allen radiation belts and solar particles from the Sun are extremely hazardous to humans. Space is also full of micrometeorites which can rip through spacesuits and metal in the blink of an eye.
There was already a parallel space program, and it had been continuing from even before the time that NASA was created in 1958. October 1958, NASA were incorporated by President Eisenhower. The secret space program was run by the Department of Defense. It took its original form in Project Horizon, which was established in 1959, the habitation of the colonization of the moon. The reason for that was that whoever controlled the moon controlled the Earth. If you could launch rockets from the moon onto your enemies on Earth, they couldn't possibly retaliate, therefore you had the upper hand. There was a serious attempt, certainly a serious investigation, to put man on the moon and keep him there. So the secret parallel space program continues to this day. There is a military space shuttle, and even the ones that we see from Columbia onwards are designed according to the specification of the Department of Defense. If you look at them, they will carry spy satellites into orbit. And if you want to know what a spy satellite looks like, the Hubble telescope is one. That is the design of what's called the KH-12 keyhole satellites, which are used today over enemy territory, which is presumably any territory that is not American.
Regardless of the dangers of radiation, and without having spacesuits nor spacecraft which can protect the occupants from radiation, NASA convinced the American people to pay $40 billion for the space program.
The most lethal forms of radiation, of course, are at the higher end of the spectrum. That's gamma rays and X-rays. We know what ultraviolet can do. If you stay out too long in the sun, you get sunburn and skin cancer and die, and it's all very sad. But gamma rays, and X-rays especially, are particularly lethal to humans, unprotected humans. There was no protection that I have been able to identify. I've found no reference to it. I found nothing that will tell me what level of protection is offered, so I have to assume none was. I've contacted the manufacturers of the spacesuits, and they said there was no radiation protection built into the spacesuits, because I asked them if these same spacesuits could be used by technicians to go to Chernobyl or 3 Mile Island, because the nuclear reactors produce the same radiation as produced in space. They said no, not advisable, no protection.
Ex-Nazis were now in charge of vast amounts of tax dollars. In today's value, the Nazis at the heart of the NASA space program were given more than $600 billion. All NASA had to do was announce a new space project, and the money was handed over so that the American government could save face in the Cold War. Alan Shepard and John Glenn were blasted into space using equipment which was still in the prototype stage.
Shields are down. Captain, they hit us with 400 gigawatts of particle energy. Damage? Superficial, but I'm having trouble reassembling the shields.
Anche la Terra ha il suo scudo deflettore, come l'Enterprise della gloriosa serie TV Star Trek, uno scudo invisibile a 11.600 km sopra le nostre teste, in grado di bloccare il transito degli elettroni killer che scorrazzano attorno al pianeta a velocità prossima a quella della luce. L'enorme quantità di particelle intrappolate nelle fasce di Van Allen è che costituisce un serio pericolo, anzitutto per i satelliti lanciati in orbita e indirettamente per gli astronauti che svolgono una missione nello spazio. È come se gli elettroni finissero per infrangersi contro una parete di vetro nel bel mezzo dello spazio, spiega Daniel Baker, direttore del laboratorio di fisica atmosferica e spaziale dell'Università del Colorado, primo autore di uno studio appena pubblicato su Nature. Un po' come succede con gli scudi deflettori che vediamo in azione in Star Trek, assistiamo al curioso fenomeno di un muro invisibile capace di bloccare il transito agli elettroni ultrarelativistici che si muovono velocissimi nello spazio ben oltre l'atmosfera terrestre. Cosa succede in un ambiente carico di radiazioni come quello dello spazio vicino alla Terra è da anni oggetto di studi e ricerche in astrofisica. Le fasce di Van Allen, le regioni a ciambella che circondano il nostro pianeta e si sviluppano fra i 6.300 e i 40.000 km di altezza, sono zone ricche di protoni ed elettroni imprigionati nel campo magnetico terrestre. Lo scudo deflettore che protegge la vita si trova qui.
Ci sono due regioni a forma di ciambella che avvolgono la Terra, si chiamano fasce di Van Allen e sono ricche di elettroni, altre particelle cariche e correnti elettriche che possono danneggiare i satelliti artificiali. La regola da seguire quindi è stare alla larga dalle fasce di Van Allen. Il 30 agosto però, con il lancio di 2 nuove sonde, la NASA ha deliberatamente violato questo divieto. Si chiamano Radiation Belt Storm Probes, sono pesantemente rivestite di materiale protettivo e hanno 2 anni di tempo per scoprire cosa renda le temute fasce tanto pericolose e imprevedibili. In presenza di una tempesta solare, ad esempio, esibiscono i comportamenti più disparati. A volte si riempiono dei cosiddetti elettroni killer, a volte invece ne vengono svuotate, altre ancora sembra non succeda proprio nulla. Difficile in questo modo formulare teorie, anche solo comprendere la natura di queste regioni. Buon lavoro alle coraggiose sonde NASA, quindi.
Nel gennaio del 1958 gli Stati Uniti mettevano in orbita il loro primo satellite, Explorer 1. Il satellite conteneva una strumentazione particolare, progettata dallo scienziato James Van Allen, che aveva lo scopo di misurare la radioattività nello spazio. Il satellite era stato lanciato lungo un'orbita eccentrica che andava da un'altezza minima di 360 km ad una massima di 2500. Grazie a questa eccentricità, Van Allen fece una doppia scoperta sorprendente. Non solo la radioattività aumentava man mano che ci si allontanava dalla Terra, ma oltre una certa distanza il contatore Geiger scendeva improvvisamente a zero prima di tornare a funzionare normalmente. È lo stesso Van Allen a raccontarci quell'esperienza.
And I began to understand that what was going on here, because we had segments of this orbit when it came down to low altitude, which looked quite normal. Then we had a very rapid change, very rapid increase in cutting rate, and then it dropped back to nothing. And then a few minutes later it came up from nothing to a very high rate and then dropped back to a normal value. And this pattern was repetitive. It seemed to be a systematic pattern.
Il motivo della caduta a zero era dovuto al fatto che le radiazioni diventavano così intense da una certa altezza in poi che il contatore Geiger semplicemente smetteva di funzionare.
And now we'll jump above 600 miles and we'll see what happens when we get closer to the source of radiation.
Uh-oh, there it goes back down to zero again.
Yes?
The transition said yes. It went into something that was strong and then went to zero. Therefore, obviously, had encountered intense radiation. And so I immediately took the spare payload for Explorer 3, put it in front of the X-ray machine, and seen just how high did I have to take the intensity to drive it to zero. And found that it had to be thousands of times higher than the cosmic ray fluxes in order to do it.
This is when the famous message from Ernie Ray, space is radioactive, occurred. He simply wrote that, scrawled that on a message and left it on Van Allen's chair, and he saw it then when he came back from Washington the next day.
We have encountered a very great increase in radiation intensity, which is vastly beyond what could be due to cosmic rays alone.
Era la scoperta delle cosiddette fasce di Van Allen, 2 cinture collocate nella magnetosfera che proteggono la vita sul nostro pianeta, intrappolando al loro interno le radiazioni più pericolose che provengono dal Sole. Nel 1959 Van Allen scriveva: il nostro pianeta è circondato da una regione, o meglio da 2 regioni, di radiazioni ad alta energia che si estendono nello spazio per molte migliaia di miglia. Questa scoperta, diceva Van Allen, ovviamente è preoccupante per gli astronauti. In qualche modo il corpo umano dovrà essere schermato da queste radiazioni anche per un transito rapido attraverso la regione. In seguito Van Allen pubblicava un altro articolo intitolato La zona pericolosa. La Terra è avvolta da mortali fasce di radiazioni. L'articolo concludeva dicendo: tutti i tentativi di missioni umane nello spazio devono tenersi lontani da questi 2 fasci di radiazioni fino a quando saranno stati sviluppati dei metodi adeguati per proteggere gli astronauti. E invece, senza che mai venisse sviluppato alcun metodo particolare di protezione, nel 1968 veniva lanciata verso la Luna e quindi attraverso le fasce di Van Allen la missione Apollo 8. La capsula in cui viaggiavano gli astronauti aveva un rivestimento di alluminio di soli 3 mm e non aveva nessuna protezione specifica contro le radiazioni.
No, the walls of the craft were made as thin and light as possible. The Apollo capsule itself was made unusually thin. In fact, they couldn't even initially carry enough air inside to be the equivalent to sea level air pressure. They ran it at reduced pressure in order to be able to make the walls thinner.
Frank Borman, Jim Lovell e Bill Anders erano i primi 3 esseri umani ad attraversare le fasce radioattive, senza che mai prima di loro fosse stata mandata nemmeno una scimmia per verificarne gli effetti su un animale simile a noi. Eppure, durante la loro missione, questo attraversamento non viene mai nemmeno nominato. Questi sono i 3 astronauti che trasmettono da circa metà strada fra la Terra e la Luna. Ma sembra che la cosa più interessante di cui parlare sia il comportamento dello spazzolino da denti in assenza di gravità. Dopo Apollo 8, altre 8 missioni hanno seguito la stessa strada, attraversando per 2 volte ciascuna, una all'andata e una al ritorno, le fasce di Van Allen. Ma la NASA ha sempre minimizzato il problema, pubblicando tabelle sulle radiazioni ricevute dagli astronauti ben al di sotto delle soglie di allarme. Secondo Paolo Attivissimo, una missione lunare di pochi giorni, come quelle Apollo, comporta radiazioni complessivamente equivalenti a una radiografia o a 3 anni di vita sulla Terra. Evidentemente Van Allen si era sbagliato quando diceva che sarebbe stato necessario schermare gli astronauti nelle fasce radioattive anche per un transito rapido attraverso la regione. A questo punto però resta un dilemma da risolvere. Visto che il problema è stato così brillantemente superato 45 anni fa, perché ora che la NASA ritorna nello spazio con la missione Orion, le fasce di Van Allen tornano ad essere un problema?
My name is Kelly Smith and I work on navigation and guidance for Orion. Before we can send astronauts into space on Orion, we have to test all of its systems. And there's only one way to know if we got it right. Fly it in space. For Orion's first flight, no astronauts will be aboard. The spacecraft is loaded with sensors to record and measure all aspects of the flight in every detail. We are headed 3,600 miles above Earth. 15 times higher from the planet than the International Space Station. As we get further away from Earth, we'll pass through the Van Allen belts, an area of dangerous radiation. Radiation like this could harm the guidance systems, onboard computers, or other electronics on Orion. Naturally, we have to pass through this danger zone twice, once up and once back. But Orion has protection. Shielding will be put to the test as the vehicle cuts through the waves of radiation. Sensors aboard will record radiation levels for scientists to study. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space.
Ma come sarebbe a dire, prima di mandare delle persone in questa zona dello spazio? 45 anni fa le radiazioni ricevute dagli astronauti dell'Apollo equivalevano ad una semplice radiografia e oggi invece dobbiamo superare queste sfide prima di mandare delle persone in questa zona dello spazio? Qui qualcuno racconta delle bugie. E forse l'unico modo per sapere la verità a questo punto è quello di rivolgersi direttamente ad uno degli astronauti che sono andati sulla Luna. Ecco cosa ha risposto Alan Bean, astronauta di Apollo 12, quando gli è stato chiesto di descrivere l'attraversamento delle fasce di Van Allen.
Any ill effects from the Van Allen radiation belts?
No, now I'm not sure we went far enough out to encounter the Van Allen radiation belt. Maybe we did.
E sentite cosa risponde Bean quando gli viene spiegato che le fasce di Van Allen si trovano fra la Terra e la Luna.
The belts are 1,000 miles to 25,000 miles above the Earth.
Then we went right out through them.
Se ce lo dice lui, ci possiamo certamente fidare.
Regardless of whether the Apollo moon landing was faked or not, an interesting photograph hangs on the wall of the Sanctuary of the Scottish Rite Masons in Washington, D.C. This photograph shows astronaut Neil Armstrong holding a Masonic apron over his spacesuit. The photograph has seemingly been taken on the moon, or at least on a studio set which resembles the surface of the moon. Neil Armstrong has become a mysterious character since his alleged moon expedition. According to the records of the Ohio Grand Lodge of Masons, Neil Armstrong's father is a Freemason. In fact, Neil Armstrong Sr. is a high-ranking 33rd degree Freemason. Neil Armstrong's co-pilot, the second man to have allegedly walked on the moon, was Buzz Aldrin. At the time of the Apollo 11 mission, Buzz Aldrin was a 32 degree Freemason. They were in good company, as many of NASA's astronauts were also Freemasons, including Gordon Cooper, Walter Schirra, John Glenn, Edgar Mitchell, Thomas Stafford, and Paul Weitz. These men were all members of the Brotherhood, all sworn to keep secrets on pain of death. These astronaut Masons were under the leadership of Kenneth Kleineknecht, who was NASA's Apollo space program manager. According to an article and photograph published in the Masonic magazine Scottish Rite Journal, upon his return from the moon, Brother Buzz Aldrin presented a flag to Sovereign Grand Commander Smith, who was the Supreme Commander of the Supreme Council of 33rd degree Masons of the world. The flag Buzz Aldrin presented had been taken to the moon on Apollo 11. According to a Masonic lecture delivered at Beauverde University in 1994 by American Masonic historians, astronauts Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong performed a Masonic ritual exactly 33 minutes after touchdown on the lunar surface. They temporarily planted the international flag of Scottish Rite Freemasonry, which features a large double-headed eagle. Therefore, the eagle has landed.
Override off. Engine arm off. 13 is in. We copy you down, Eagle. Listen, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
And we're getting a picture on the TV.
The short Masonic ritual Armstrong and Aldrin allegedly performed declared the celestial body of the moon to be the property of the Masonic God. Who is the Masonic God? As confirmed by former Supreme Commander of the 33rd Degree and Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, Albert Pike, the Masonic God is Lucifer. The name of NASA's space program, Apollo, according to the Holy Bible, is actually an alternative word for the devil. We can see this in the Bible as the word Apollyon. Apollyon appears as the name of Satan in the original texts of the New Testament Gospels. Once you learn the occult significance of words such as Apollo, Columbia, and Atlantis, you will realize that the occultically inspired murdering Nazis who developed NASA's space program have used names which are part of ritual, magic, and the occult.
Hawati entawi, tem jefa kau. Ta pen MAF, Mu F, Ta F, Sam F, Menemenet F Nebet, Hayet Nebet, Henenet Nebet, Jedefuet F, Awet F Haset, Semau M Sanuet.